So, yeah, I'm taking a leadership role in this NEA Research Lab, a funded project to measure the impact of apprenticeship programs in our nation. My goal in our hour is to share the motivation and current status of the research and to explain your role as an advisory working group and to project forward the timeline of our work together and the future of this multi-phase research plan. So I'm going to take, I hope, about 30 minutes to tell the story of the research, and then I want to field your questions. This research story begins with an email conversation on Publore, which is an email listserv of public sector folklorists. And I found myself drawn into a conversation with former director of the NEA folk arts discipline, Cliff Murphy, and former director of the American Folklife Center, Betsy Peterson, just about the gap in evidence that shows the profound impact that apprenticeships have on participants in their communities over time. And those of us who run these programs or have been part of them are reminded through participation or through conversation with participants about the numerous voices and the value of bringing mentors and apprentices together to share cultural knowledge. And yet it seems that there's no systematic research that's been conducted across the nation that would provide NEA with the kind of statistics that are needed to substantiate the kind of ubiquity of these anecdotal claims that we make. So this seemed to me like a problem that had a solution. And Cliff pointed me to the NEA Research Division as a possible funder for our project. And so that's where I jumped in. So the team here on this slide shows the logos of those of us who were funded in January of 2024 for a 2-year inaugural project with the 3 traditional arts offices on the left, offering to find and interpret a small set of apprenticeship program data. Native American scholar Dina Dart, founder of Live Oak Consulting, is our research designer and analyst. And then Creative West, formerly called Westaff, is producing our final impact report. So this is a really big undertaking with many challenges I will outline. And this first 2-year phase is simply an attempt to try out a method to gain traction and experience. Our method is not the only way to do this, and it's definitely not perfect, but we hopefully won't be the only ones trying this research over time. And we're really happy to just try, and we welcome your ideas for how the design meets or could better meet the needs and values of your communities or the agencies that you represent. I invited Live Oak Consulting to collaborate with us as our research analyst because I had the great privilege of being a contract research assistant for Dina back in 2019, and I knew that she would create a really excellent community-oriented research method that lays the groundwork for this multi-stage lab that we're just in phase 1. So the report that I helped her in back in 2019 was funded by the Native Cultures Fund, who sought to understand the benefits of their grants to California's Native nations. Live Oak conducted listening sessions with past recipients of Native Cultures Fund grants, and those conversations produced transcripts that we then highlighted when participants spoke about their cultural values. And then we categorized these value statements into core community values. So an excerpt from that report is on the right-hand side of this slide, and it shows one such theme, which was pulled out, and that was broadly land, home, connection to place and the natural world. And followed by that is a brief description of what that theme means. So here it's, and she notes in the report that this value is kind of intrinsically linked to all the others, but it's a value centrally, certainly true of California Native people. Responses ranged from the need to access to important historical, ceremonial, cultural, and resource sites, healing the trauma that the land had endured since colonization, and the land informing all aspects of cultural knowledge. So you've got this kind of values category, and then a brief definition of what it means, followed by a quote that comes from the original data in the orange section, and then several other examples of what got tucked underneath that value statement. So that's to give a bit of a sense of the process and the direction we're headed, I give this QR code to the full report if anyone is interested in seeing more about that. But and to the left is this indigenous model. And before I talk more about how we're adopting this model from the Native Cultures Fund, I just want to differentiate our research from the other arts intervention research that the NEA Research Lab funds. It's just kind of interesting to see what we're doing and how it compares to other arts research that's funded around the nation. So what I've seen is that often university centers will partner with a community site to implement what they would call an arts intervention. Like, let's say we're going to use puppetry to help heal trauma. So they collect data that measures the health benefits. Let's say on day 1, you felt this way. By day 60, you felt this other way. And many of the organizations who are also doing these research labs that I've spoken with, they share kind of a classic challenge of their design, which is not knowing if the communities they're serving are actually interested in these interventions that they're investing in. So by contrast, I'll just highlight that our research starts with the communities who have already chosen to get involved with apprenticeships. And we know these services were requested, and we learned through our interviews that participation has had beneficial impact. What we're focused on in this research then is finding ways to discuss these results as long-term benefits to not just individuals, but to cultural art forms and to cultural communities. So the key elements of successful Indigenous methodology that I'm showing on this slide map on fairly well to our approach. We're involving the communities from the beginning, and we really hope that our processes are honoring community goals that they are defining in their apprenticeship applications. And we try as folklorists to be sensitive to the traditional mistrust of research and organizational processes and try to be more accessible and bridge builders, and to really respect the importance of community self-determining what cultural forms are of value right now to be supporting, and then through that process to build trust and respect. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the language that we use, because many of us who are arts administrators or artists don't often use words that are found in research language. But to our benefit, each of our lab partners already has access to decades of what we would call pre-existing data, often in the participants' own words, and sometimes we maintain long-standing programmatic relationships with these cultural leaders too. So we have applications, interviews, final reports, recordings of public demonstrations. However, our data, as it were, was not collected as data per se, but as program records. And so they really lack the uniformity year to year or across different programs that research rigor would have applied had that been our goal at the outset. So we have one of our challenges is we have great programmatic diversity within each of our programs over time and across the differences between our programs as well. So example, we award different amounts of money. Some of those funds go to mentors. Others of us give funding to the apprentices or to both. Our applications ask really different questions. Some of us require public performances, others don't. And so one of the things that we learned is where Pete and Dara work at the Center for Traditional Music and Dance, those apprenticeship applications, and you can of course correct me at the end here if I'm misinterpreting this, but my understanding is that this comes out of field work. And so there's a community that has been chosen to be kind of a specific outreach effort to that particular community. And in those community conversations, the center would be asking, what are the art forms that really need to be supported, and who should we be nominating for these apprenticeships? Because our state arts agency is going to be looking for strong apprentices, mentor and apprentice teams. So the staff then reach out directly to those who are kind of uplifted through the community and help filling out those applications for the teams, and then submit those to the state's public call for artists. Whereas my understanding is in Texas and I know in Oregon, we lack the funding to support local sites to do that kind of in community outreach and relationship building, and only have the capacity to do a public call for applications. So our records, a benefit of that is that our records are in our applicants' own words. But it's also maybe not the best programmatic practice to just kind of raise your sign up and say, hey, anybody who wants to, please come over here and fill out this application, rather than really working closely and deeply with community. So within our programs, we support arts from various ethnic cultures, sacred cultures, occupational cultures. So even if we eliminate the strong variables that are across our programs, within our programs, we have a lot of variety from the various kinds of cultures, and then the art forms themselves, ranging from music and dance, textiles, leatherwork, foodways, I mean, you name it. So when it comes to measuring impact, we we also lack any kind of like baseline cultural vitality metric. So we aren't starting from, we know that people entering our program had X happiness ratio or quotient or whatever other more typical arts research methods might look at. But despite all of these variables, we feel like we can rise to this challenge and measure cultural sustainability by taking a slightly different approach to it. So just one more background piece is that there have been some reports that summarize folk arts programs nationwide, but not specifically apprenticeships across the field. And then apprenticeship data has been reported within specific state agencies, but not so much across, though I'm learning about a few others that I need to read up on that may have come in at different times. But I wanted to share a fabulous example within a community. Teresa Secord, who is part of our advisory working group, but couldn't be here with us today. I really want to highlight her reporting on the Maine Indian Basket Weavers Alliance. So she, for example, was showing that the number of basket weavers grew over time since starting the Basket Weavers Alliance, and that the average age of those weavers had lowered. So these are effective quantitative measures. That's like numeric measures of a tradition becoming more sustainable. Of course, knowing if artists are selling more units or charging higher prices is another way to measure economic growth and perhaps sustainability, at least, within that kind of economic framework. And then feeling better or living longer are hallmarks of individual health and well-being, another measure of success. But we're focusing on, in this lab, the question from that first conversation with Cliff and Betsy, asking about the impact apprenticeships have had on cultural traditions and their communities. So our partners at Live Oak posed this question to me. If you want to know if you're having a positive impact on communities, do you know what the communities value? So we're kind of picking up where that Native Cultures Fund approach started us, combing through the data that we've already gathered to see if communities have already told us their values in our interviews, applications, and final reports, our data. To simplify our data, to make less variables, each folk arts partner has selected one cultural community with which we've had significant programmatic engagement. So the Center for Traditional Music and Dance is focusing on the Sri Lankan community, Texas is focusing on the Tejano community, and Oregon is focusing on our Native nations. So we're sticking with recent data just over the last 10 years or so. Our partners at Live Oak Consulting have fresh eyes on our question of impact and have really reverse engineered the question of cultural sustainability to ask, what are the cultural values core to these communities? And if we can identify through our records of engagement with cultural leaders what their cultural values are, then perhaps we can assess how those values are being supported through apprenticeships. So I'm offering this statement by Wilverna Reese, and those of you who saw my presentation at the American Folklore Society meeting know this activity, but we stopped and looked at Wilverna's statement. They say, your first one you have to give away. And so if we imagine an auntie giving us this guidance, then what cultural value is or are values are being upheld by following it? And I'm gonna just let you sit with that question for a minute while I'll go on, and we can use this exercise if it's valuable later, but I've got just a couple more slides and then I'll open it up. So each of the traditional arts partner works with data from our own state, and we tag quotes with values-based themes that we find there. We make an educated guess about what to call these themes, and as we pull more quotes into a thematic bucket, we refine the values statement to fit a little better. And I acknowledge this is a very precarious process because we who are coding are observers, we're not participants, we're not of the same cultural community often, and have not received these teachings directly through a community relationship. So that's why we are paying culture bearers to advise us. And as we prepare for this work to be published with recommendations to the field, we also need to consult the state arts agencies to whom the folk arts programs report. That is why representatives from the broader organizations who provide these apprenticeship programs are donating their staff time to advise us. So this collective will meet 4 times to hear about and give feedback on our methods. And the artists evaluate our assessment of the value tags, and hopefully our organizational leaders will keep us mindful of field-wide concerns. So lastly, I just wanted to share, kind of pulling back out into the big picture, we're actively fundraising for phase 2 of this research right now, which is going to move us out of working in our archives and into working more directly with communities. We understand that this is really the better practice, but we thought we would kind of save community engagement for after we'd gone through a little of the agony of figuring out what we're doing. So we plan to, in phase 2, hopefully add a couple of more sites to catch up with us and then join us as we invite community members into this research process. So we've imagined things like moving into communities, having more active listening sessions, eating together, doing art activities together, building community together, and listening as we ask for thoughts on the process that we're undertaking now and the results of this phase 1. So we're learning right now about how, if or when it might be right to adopt a participatory action research method, where we might train culture keepers as community scholars to lead this effort within their own communities as teammates in our research. So that's a really big kind of pulling back out to big picture. I've given some kind of milestone dates over on the right-hand side